My family ignored me for years, then they discovered my secret fortune the day I turned 18. I walked out of my family home with nothing but a duffel bag and the clothes on my back. No one noticed me leave. My mother was too busy planning my sister's engagement party, my father was at work, and my 3 siblings were scattered across the house, buried in their phones or their own dramas. I had become invisible years ago, a ghost haunting the periphery of their lives. I remember standing at the end of the driveway, looking back at the house that had never felt like home. The sprawling colonial with its manicured lawns and pristine white shutters. From the outside it looked like the picture of success. Inside it was a battlefield where I had always been the casualty. Margaret, my older sister by 4 years, had been the golden child. Valedictorian, Ivy League bound, engaged to a doctor. My brother Thomas, 2 years older, was the athlete, the one my father lived vicariously through. The twins Emily and Grace were the Barbies doted on and adored. Then there was me, the middle child who had somehow been forgotten in the chaos of raising 5 children. I wasn't a problem child. I didn't act out or cause scenes. I simply existed, and that was apparently not enough to warrant attention. My report cards, filled with A's, went unnoticed while Margaret's B- in calculus warranted a celebratory dinner. My acceptance to a decent university was acknowledged with a nod, while Thomas's athletic scholarship was celebrated with champagne. The day I turned 18, I decided I was done waiting to be seen. The next decade was a blur of determination and solitude. I worked 3 jobs while attending community college, sleeping 4 hours a night, and surviving on coffee and determination. I didn't call home, no one called me either. The first year I'd check my phone obsessively, hopping for a text or a missed call. There was never anything. By year 3 I had stopped checking. I finished my degree in finance at a state school, graduating summa cum laude. No one was in the audience. I walked across that stage alone, the same way I had walked through life for years. I took a job at a boutique investment firm, working under a man named Arthur Chen who saw something in me that no one else ever had. A fighter, he told me during my interview. I can see it in your eyes, you've been through something. I didn't tell him about my family. I didn't tell anyone. I kept my past locked away like a shameful secret, convinced that if people knew how little my family cared about me, they'd realize I wasn't worth caring about either. Arthur became a mentor, then a friend, then something like the father I'd never had. He taught me everything he knew about the markets, about reading people, about seeing value where others saw nothing. Under his guidance, I started making my own investments, carefully at first, then with increasing confidence. By 28, I had amassed a small fortune, nearly $2 million in various accounts. It wasn't enough to retire, but it was enough to know I would never be dependent on anyone again. I bought a small apartment in the city, furnished it with thrift store finds and second-hand books, and told myself I was content, but I was still invisible. I dated sporadically, never letting anyone get too close. I made friends but kept them at arm's length. The fear of being rejected again, of being forgotten, was a wound that had never healed. I had built a fortress around my heart and no one had the key. Arthur noticed. He always noticed. You need to let people in, he told me one afternoon, his office overlooking the Manhattan skyline. Money isn't going to keep you warm at night. Money keeps the lights on, I replied, deflecting as I always did. Lights aren't the same as love. I didn't have an answer for that. I never did. The years passed and I continued to build my wealth. Arthur retired and left me his most lucrative clients. I expanded the firm, took on partners, and watched my net worth climb into the tens of millions. By 33, I was worth over $40 million. My portfolio was diversified across real estate, stocks, bonds, and private equity. I had built an empire from nothing, brick by painstaking brick. And still I was invisible. I had kept a listless eye on my family through the years, succumbing to the occasional Google search late at night when the loneliness became too much. Margaret had married her doctor, had 2 perfect children, and was now a partner at a prestigious law firm. Thomas had blown out his knee in college, lost his athletic scholarship, and was now managing a car dealership my father had bought him. The twins had both married well and were living in the suburbs, raising their own families. My parents were still in the same house. My father had retired from his executive position, and my mother spent her days volunteering at the country club and planning parties. They looked happy in the photos I found online. They looked like a family. They just didn't look like my family. I should have moved on. I should have accepted that I was better off without them, that their neglect had forged me into someone stronger. But there was still a part of me, the small, scared teenager who had stood at the end of the driveway, that wanted them to see me, to finally acknowledge that I existed. That part of me was about to get its wish, though not in the way I had ever imagined. It started with a letter. I was 35, sitting in my corner office on the 42nd floor reviewing quarterly reports when my assistant knocked on the door. "Ms. Warren, there's a letter for you, hand-delivered." She placed the cream-colored envelope on my desk. The messenger said it was urgent. I recognized the handwriting immediately. My mother's elegant cursive, the same looping letters she'd used to address my birthday cards before they stopped coming altogether. My hand trembled as I opened the envelope. "Dearest Elena, I know it's been years, and I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but your father is very ill. The doctors have given him 6 months, perhaps less. He's been asking about you, and I hoped you might want to see him before it's too late. Please come home. Whatever happened between us, we're still your family. With love, Mother." I read the letter 3 times, searching for some hint of the old neglect, some clue that this was a trap. I found none. Just a desperate plea from a mother who had finally remembered she had a 5th child. I should have ignored it. I should have crumpled the letter and thrown it away the way they had thrown away any chance at a relationship with me. But my father was dying. Whatever he had or hadn't done, he was still my father. I called my assistant and cancelled my meetings for the week. I booked a flight home. The house looked smaller than I remembered. I stood in the driveway, my rental car idling behind me, staring at the colonial that had once seemed so grand. The lawn was still manicured, the shutters still white, but something about it felt diminished. Maybe it was me. Maybe I was no longer the small, insignificant girl who had slipped away unnoticed. I rang the doorbell and my mother answered. She looked older, her hair now silver, her face lined with worry. She stared at me for a long moment, and I saw her eyes move from my face to the expensive watch on my wrist, to the designer coat I was wearing, to the car behind me. "Elena," she breathed. "You came. You asked me to." She reached out to hug me, and I let her, though my body remained rigid. She smelled the same, the floral perfume she'd worn my entire childhood, the faint scent of laundry detergent. For a moment I was 14 again, invisible in my own home, watching my mother fawn over Margaret's achievements while I stood in the background waiting to be seen. "Your father is in the study," she said, pulling back. "He's been asking for you." I followed her through the house, past the family photos on the wall that had never included me, past the formal living room that had always been off limits to children, past the kitchen where I'd made my own meals because no one remembered to cook for me. Everything was the same, and yet it all felt like a museum of my own irrelevance. My father was in his favorite leather chair, a blanket draped over his legs, an oxygen tube in his nose. He looked thin, frail, nothing like the imposing figure who had dominated my childhood. His eyes lit up when he saw me, and for the first time in my life I saw something like pride in them. "Elena," he said, his voice weak. "You came." I came. He gestured for me to sit, and I took the chair across from him, the one that had always been reserved for guests. My mother hovered in the doorway, and I could see her wringing her hands, unsure of what to do with the daughter who had been invisible for so long. "Have a confession to make," my father said. "I know I wasn't the best father to you. I know I didn't see you the way I should have, but I saw enough. I saw that you were strong, that you didn't need anyone's approval to succeed." "I knew you would be fine." "Fine," I repeated. "That's what I was to you, fine." "I'm sorry," he said, and there were tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry I didn't say that sooner. I'm sorry I let you slip away. I'm sorry for all of it." I sat there, frozen, unable to process the apology I had waited my entire life to hear. It should have felt like vindication. Instead, it felt hollow. "I built a life," I said finally. "I didn't need you. I didn't need any of you." "I know," he said. "I know you didn't, but I'm glad you came. I needed to see you one last time." The next few days were strange. My siblings arrived one by one, each of them looking at me with a mixture of recognition and unease. Margaret hugged me like we were close, like she hadn't ignored me for 2 decades. Thomas clapped me on the back and called me kid, as if I were still the teenager who had idolized him. The twins looked at me with blank expressions, the same way they'd looked at me our entire lives. They didn't know me, they had never known me, but they were curious now. They had seen my coat, my watch, the car I drove. They had heard my mother mention that I had done quite well for herself, and they wanted to know more. "You must be a partner at some big firm," Margaret said one evening, cornering me in the kitchen. "That's how you afford all those nice things, right?" "I own the firm," I said flatly. "Several firms, actually." Her eyes widened. "You own them, plural." I've had a lot of time to focus on my career without distractions. Dig landed, and I saw it in her face. She was a successful lawyer, a partner at a prestigious firm. But I was the one who had built something from nothing, who had no one to thank but herself. That realization was uncomfortable for her. "What do you own exactly?" Thomas asked, overhearing the conversation. I named a few of my holdings, watching their faces shift as they realized the scale of what I had built. the investment firm, the real estate portfolio, the tech startups I'd funded in their early stages, the private equity fund that had returned 400% over the past decade. Much are you worth? Thomas asked bluntly. I considered lying, but I was tired of being invisible, tired of being the forgotten child. 42 million, I said. Approximately. Silence that followed was deafening. I could see them doing the math in their heads, see the calculations running behind their eyes. The family had always been comfortable, upper-middle-class comfort, but $42 million was different. $42 million was life-changing. And then I saw it, the shift in their expressions, the sudden, desperate attention, the way they leaned in, the way they touched me like I was suddenly real to them. Elena, Margaret said, her voice dripping with newfound warmth. I had no idea. Why didn't you ever tell us? Because you never asked, I said. You never asked how I was doing, what I was doing if I was alive. For years I was invisible to all of you, and now that you know I have money, you want to be my family. We've always been your family, Thomas said, but his voice was defensive. Really? Then tell me what I did in high school. Tell me who my best friend was. Tell me what I was afraid of, what I dreamed about, what I wanted to be. They couldn't answer. They looked at each other, then at the floor, then at the walls. They couldn't answer because they hadn't been paying attention. They had never paid attention. The funeral was 2 weeks later. My father had slipped away peacefully, surrounded by the family he had neglected and the wife who had enabled that neglect. I stood at the graveside, feeling nothing but a dull ache of regret. Not for the father I had lost, but for the father I had never had. My siblings clustered around me afterward, each of them vying for my attention, my affection, my money. Margaret asked if I could help with her son's college tuition. Thomas wanted to know if I was interested in investing in his struggling dealership. The twins mentioned their mortgage payments and their dreams of a larger home. I listened to them all, and I felt the old wounds begin to bleed again. They hadn't changed. They had simply found a new reason to care about me, but I had changed. I was no longer the invisible girl who craved their approval. I was a woman who had built an empire from nothing, who had proven her worth 1,000 times over without any of them noticing. I'm going to make you all a proposition, I said, cutting through their endless stream of requests. I'll give each of you $1 million, no strings attached, you can use it however you want. Their faces lit up. I could see the greed, the anticipation, the desperate hunger, but there's one condition. I continued, you have to earn it. Earn it how? Margaret asked warily. You have to do one thing for me, I said. For the next month I want you to be my family. I want you to call me every day and ask how I'm doing. I want you to show up for dinner on Sundays. I want you to treat me like a member of this family, not a source of income. That's it? Thomas asked, incredulous. That's all you want? No, I said. After that month, if I feel like you've made a genuine effort, I'll give you the money. But if I feel like you're just going through the motions, if I feel like you're still the same people who ignored me for 20 years, you get nothing. I watched their faces shift through a series of emotions: hope, calculation, fear. They were already planning their strategies, trying to figure out how to fake sincerity well enough to fool me. They didn't realize that I could see right through them. I had been invisible for so long that I had become an expert at reading people. I knew when someone was pretending, and I knew when they were genuine. That month was brutal. My siblings called me every day, their voices dripping with false warmth. They showed up for Sunday dinners, asking about my life in a way that felt performative and hollow. I could see the effort behind it, the calculation, the desperation, but something strange happened over the course of those 4 weeks. The performances began to slip, and real moments started to emerge. Margaret told me about her struggles with motherhood, about the pressure she felt to be perfect, about the toll her demanding career had taken on her marriage. Thomas admitted he had always been jealous of my independence, of my ability to build something without anyone's help. The twins confessed that they had always felt overlooked too, trapped in the shadow of Margaret's achievements and Thomas's athleticism. For the first time we talked, really talked. We talked about our childhood, about the invisible girl and the golden child and the forgotten middle children. We talked about our parents, about the favoritism and the neglect and the damage it had all caused. And somewhere in those conversations, I began to see them differently. They weren't villains, they were products of the same broken family I had escaped. They had been swept up in the same dysfunctional dynamics, fighting for scraps of attention in a household that had never had enough to go around. I wasn't ready to forgive them. I wasn't sure I ever would be. But I was beginning to understand them at the end of the month. I gathered them all in the study, the same room where my father had died. They sat nervously, waiting for my verdict. I could see the fear in their eyes, the desperation, the hope. Decided to give you the money, I said. Their faces broke into relieved smiles. Margaret started to thank me, but I held up my hand to stop her. Wait, I said. I'm giving you the money, but I need you to understand something. This doesn't mean you're forgiven. This doesn't mean the past is erased. I'm giving you this money because I don't need it, and because I want to see if you can use it to build something better than what we had. I looked at each of them in turn. Been invisible for a long time, I said. But I'm not invisible anymore. I built a life without you, and I'm proud of that. I'm proud of what I accomplished. I'm proud of who I became. But I'm also tired of being alone. I'm tired of carrying this anger. So I'm giving you a chance not to make up for the past, but to build a future. Thomas spoke first. What do you need from us? Honesty, I said. And effort. I don't need you to pretend to love me. I just need you to try. I need you to be present, to call, to show up. I need you to be my family in the ways you never were before. Margaret nodded slowly. I can do that. Me too, Thomas said, and the twins echoed their agreement. I didn't believe them completely. I had been burned too many times to trust so easily. But I was willing to give them a chance. I was willing to see if something good could come from all this pain. That was 5 years ago. Things haven't been perfect. They rarely are, but something has shifted in our family. My siblings call me now not just because they want something, but because they actually want to talk. We've started having real conversations, the kind we never had growing up. We've started to understand each other, to see each other as people rather than roles. Margaret and I have become close, in a way I never expected. She's the one who calls me when she's having a bad day, who sends me articles she thinks I'd find interesting, who remembers my birthday without being reminded. Thomas has been helping me with a few of my investments, using the dealership as a testing ground for new strategies. The twins have started coming to the city for weekends, dragging me to museums and restaurants and shows. My mother is the hardest. She still struggles to see me, to acknowledge the years of neglect. But she's trying, and I'm trying to let her. We've had difficult conversations, tearful conversations, conversations where she's apologized and I've accepted, even when I wasn't sure I could. I still have moments of anger. Moments when the old wounds flare up and I wonder why I'm bothering with any of them. But I also have moments of gratitude. Moments when I look at my family, the one I've built from scratch, the one I'm still building, and I feel something I never thought I would feel again. I feel seen. I'm sitting in my office now, watching the sun set over the city. The quarterly reports can wait. The meetings can wait. Right now I'm thinking about my father, about the apology he gave me on his deathbed. I'm thinking about all the years I spent in this.